not sleeping again? Staring at the ceiling while your mind refuses to switch off? Feeling tired in your body but wide awake in your thoughts? You're not alone, and you're not broken. Exhale slowly. This is where the noise begins to fade. This is a story about a partnership that changed both species involved. About how wildcats became house cats, not through human intervention, but through their own choice. About grain stores and mice, about tolerance and mutual benefit, about the slow dance of domestication that happened so gradually, neither species quite noticed it was occurring. This is the story of the original security system, the first time humans employed cats to protect something precious. Imagine the Fertile Crescent, that arc of land stretching from the Persian Gulf to the Mediterranean Sea, encompassing parts of what we now call Iraq, Syria, Lebanon, Israel, and Turkey. The climate is warmer then, more temperate, blessed with winter rains and fertile soil. And in this landscape, small communities of humans are doing something revolutionary. They're staying put. They're planting emmer wheat and barley. They're building houses of mud, brick, and stone. They're storing grain in raised granaries to protect it from flood and rot. And watching from the desert edges, golden eyes gleaming in the dusk, are the Near Eastern wildcats, small, sandy-colored solitary hunters. They've noticed something interesting about these human settlements, something that smells like opportunity. Around 10,000 years ago, give or take a few centuries, humans in the Fertile Crescent made a choice that would change everything. They stopped wandering. For millennia, humans had been nomadic, following game animals, gathering wild plants, moving with the seasons. But in this particular region, blessed with wild ancestors of wheat and barley, someone noticed that the grass seeds they gathered could be planted, that they would grow, that a harvest could be controlled, predicted, relied upon. This was the beginning of agriculture, the Neolithic Revolution, scholars call it now. The shift from hunter-gatherer to farmer. And with it came something humanity had never had before: surplus. Grain that could be harvested in autumn and stored for winter. Enough food to support larger populations. Enough stability to stay in one place year-round. The first granaries appeared around 9,500 years ago. Simple structures raised on posts or built with suspended floors to keep the grain dry and protected. They were small at first, perhaps 3 meters by 3 meters, holding enough grain for a single family or small extended group. But as settlements grew, so did storage needs. Soon, there were rooms dedicated entirely to grain storage, then whole buildings. The grain itself was precious beyond measure. Emmer wheat, with its nutty flavor and high protein content. Barley, hardy and versatile, used for flatbread and beer. These weren't just food sources. They were wealth. They were survival. They were the foundation upon which the first civilizations would be built. But grain has a problem. It attracts mice. The house mouse, Mus musculus, evolved alongside human agriculture. Wherever grain was stored, mice appeared. They were perfectly adapted to living near humans, comfortable in the shadows of granaries, prolific breeders who could devastate stored food in a single season. Archaeological evidence shows mouse populations exploding around 10,000 years ago, exactly coinciding with the establishment of grain agriculture. For early farmers, this was catastrophic. A granary could lose half its contents to mice in a winter. Families could starve, villages could fail. The mice were small, fast, numerous, and almost impossible to control with the technology available. Humans tried storing grain in sealed containers, in rooms with narrow entrances, in elevated structures, but mice are excellent climbers, capable of squeezing through impossibly small gaps. What humans needed was a predator, one that would work continuously, that could access the same small spaces mice used, that was small enough to navigate granaries, but deadly enough to control the population. They needed, though they didn't know it yet, cats. And the cats, hunted in the wild desert margins, had noticed the mice too, noticed that around human settlements, prey was suddenly concentrated, abundant, easy to catch. The wildcat's natural prey, small rodents, birds, lizards, had always been scattered across large territories, requiring extensive hunting to survive. But near these new permanent villages, mice were everywhere. Some wildcats, the boldest and most tolerant of human presence, began to linger near the settlements, not interacting with humans directly, but hunting in the spaces between buildings, around the granaries, in the refuse heaps that every human community inevitably produces. They found an ecological niche that hadn't existed before agriculture, and they flourished. The cat that approached those first agricultural villages was Felis sylvestris libica, the African wildcat, though it ranged throughout North Africa and the Near East. It was similar in size to a modern domestic cat, but leaner, longer-legged, built for the open terrain of savanna and semi-desert. Its coat was sandy brown or gray, providing camouflage against rock and dried grass, with faint tabby markings that would become more pronounced in its domestic descendants. This was a solitary, nocturnal hunter. Wildcats live spread out across large territories, males controlling areas of several square kilometers, females somewhat less. They came together only to mate, then separated again. Their prey was whatever small creatures they could catch, jerboas and other desert rodents, birds, insects, occasionally small reptiles. Life was hard, food was scattered, and many kittens didn't survive their first year. But the wildcats that lived near the earliest farming villages discovered something remarkable. The hunting was easy, extraordinarily easy. Mice were so abundant around the granaries that a cat could catch its daily requirements in hours, rather than spending all night ranging across kilometers of desert. The energy expenditure dropped, the success rate soared, and suddenly more kittens survived. Not all wildcats could take advantage of this new resource. Most were too fearful of humans, too committed to solitary wild existence. They avoided the villages, stuck to their traditional territories, continued hunting the hard way. But some were different. Some had, through random genetic variation, slightly lower fear responses to human presence. These individuals could tolerate being near people without fleeing. This tolerance was the key. The cats didn't need to be friendly, didn't need to seek human contact. They just needed to not run away, to accept that humans were part of the landscape, large and noisy, but not particularly threatening if you kept your distance. The cats that possessed this trait could access the abundant food source near villages. The cats that didn't, couldn't. Natural selection began to work. The tolerant cats had more surviving offspring because they had better access to food. Their kittens inheriting that slight tolerance, could also hunt near humans. Over generations, the population of wildcats associated with human settlements became gradually, almost imperceptibly, less fearful. Not tame exactly, but no longer entirely wild either. Humans, for their part, began to notice the cats, saw them in the shadows at dusk, hunting rats and mice around the granaries, saw the mouse populations dropping where cats were present, and made a crucial decision. They left the cats alone, didn't chase them, didn't try to catch them, didn't view them as competitors for food. Instead, they recognized the cats as useful, as allies in a constant battle against rodents. This passive acceptance was revolutionary. Unlike the active domestication of sheep and goats, which required capture, confinement, and controlled breeding, cats domesticated themselves. Humans simply tolerated their presence, and cats chose to stay. The partnership was voluntary on both sides, based on mutual benefit rather than human control. The cats kept their wild instincts largely intact. They still hunted. They still maintained territories. They still avoided direct contact with humans, but they did it all within or near human settlements, accepting people as a permanent feature of the environment. This semi-domestic status would persist for thousands of years, and arguably continues today, since most domestic cats retain the ability to survive independently if necessary. Archaeological evidence confirms this gradual process. A cat buried with a human on the island of Cyprus dates to 9,500 years ago. Since Cyprus had no native cats, humans must have brought this cat by boat from the nearby mainland, suggesting a valued relationship even at this early date. By 7,000 years ago, cat remains are common at settlements throughout the Fertile Crescent, though still indistinguishable from wild cats in skeletal structure. The true genetic divergence between wild and domestic cats happened slowly, over thousands of years, as the village-dwelling population became increasingly isolated from their wild relatives. Even today, domestic cats can interbreed with wild cats and produce fertile offspring, evidence of how recent this separation truly is in evolutionary terms. To understand this partnership, you must imagine the granary itself. Picture a room with thick mud brick walls designed to stay cool even in summer heat. The floor is raised, built on posts or on a bed of stones, creating an air gap that prevents moisture from rising into the stored grain. The ceiling is low, made of wooden beams and packed earth, heavy enough to stay in place but with gaps for ventilation. Inside, the light is dim, filtering through small openings near the roof. Dust motes hang suspended in the shafts of sunlight, each particle catching light like tiny stars. The air itself is thick with the smell of grain, a dry, nutty scent, warm and slightly sweet, with undertones of earth and straw. The grain is stored in large ceramic jars or woven baskets, or simply piled in corners on woven mats. Emmer wheat, each kernel still encased in its tough hull, glooms that protect the seed but must be removed before eating. Barley, with its characteristic long awns extending from each grain like whiskers. The texture is coarse when you run your hand through it, hard kernels that click and shift against each other with a sound like distant rain. There's a particular quality to the silence in a granary. The thick walls muffle outside sounds, creating a space that feels removed from the world. You can hear the grain itself, the tiny settling sounds as weight shifts, the occasional rustle that might be grain or might be mice. Your breath sounds loud. Your footsteps on the raised floor create hollow echoes, and then you hear it, the unmistakable scurry of small feet. The grain shifts, kernels tumbling as something moves beneath the surface. A mouse, perhaps, or several, tunneling through the stored food, creating networks of passages, eating and defecating and breeding, slowly destroying the winter's provisions. This is what the farmers feared. This quiet theft, this invisible devastation that could mean hunger before the next harvest. They swept the granaries daily, set traps, tried various deterrents, but nothing worked as well as the predator that moved in the darkness with them. Silent on soft paws, golden eyes seeing clearly in the dim light that humans found nearly blinding. The cat enters the granary the way cats always enter enclosed spaces, cautiously, whiskers extended to gauge the opening's width, ears rotating to catch sounds, every sense alert. Once inside, it pauses, letting its eyes adjust, its nose reading the air. Grain, yes, dust. Human scent, though no humans present at the moment. And underneath it all, mouse. The hunt that follows is patient. Cats are ambush predators, not pursuit hunters. The cat finds a position where it can watch the grain piles, settles into perfect stillness, and waits. Minutes pass, tens of minutes. The cat doesn't move, doesn't shift, barely breathes. It has the patience of stone. Then, movement. The grain shifts. A mouse emerges, whiskers twitching, checking for danger. The cat's pupils dilate. Muscles gather, coiling like springs. One paw lifts, infinitesimally slowly, weight shifting in preparation. The mouse, confident now, moves further from its hole, begins to feed on scattered kernels. The strike is explosive and nearly silent. The cat covers the distance in a single bound, paws outstretched, catching the mouse before it can react. There's a brief squeak, cut off, then silence again, broken only by the cat's rough tongue cleaning whiskers, the crunch of small bones, the quiet sounds of a predator fulfilling its part of the contract. The farmer, checking the granary at dusk, sees the cat slip past in the shadows, sees the mouse carcasses left on the floor, evidence of successful hunting, sees over weeks and months that the grain is lasting longer, that fewer kernels are scattered on the floor, that the stores are staying intact, and the farmer, who has no concept of domestication or selective breeding or symbiotic relationships, simply knows this: the cat is useful. The cat keeps the mice down. The cat should stay. Perhaps the farmer leaves food scraps occasionally, perhaps not. The cat doesn't need them, the mice provide enough. But the gesture, if it happens, reinforces the relationship, marks the cat as tolerated, as wanted, as part of the community's ecology. What happened in those Fertile Crescent villages 10,000 years ago was a contract written in behavior, not language. The terms were simple. Cats would hunt the rodents that threatened grain stores. Humans would not harm the cats, would allow them access to buildings and granaries, would tolerate their presence in the community. Neither party negotiated these terms consciously. They simply emerged from mutual benefit, from pragmatic recognition that this arrangement worked better for both than any alternative. This contract required no formal agreement, no ceremony, no moment of domestication. It was gradual, accumulating over generations as cats grew more comfortable near humans and humans grew more accustomed to cats. The partnership spread as agriculture spread, cats accompanying farmers, or perhaps following mice that accompanied farmers across Africa, Asia, and eventually the world. Unlike dogs, who were actively selected for specific traits, who became working partners trained and directed by humans, cats remained largely unchanged. They weren't asked to herd or guard or hunt on command. They were simply there, doing what cats do, and that was enough. Their wild instincts remained intact, which was precisely what made them valuable. A cat that hunted whenever it pleased, that followed its own inclinations, was more effective at rodent control than any human-directed strategy. This hands-off domestication created something unique, a domestic animal that remained fundamentally wild in behavior, an independent creature that chose to live near humans rather than being forced to do so. Cats kept their nocturnal habits, their solitary nature, their territoriality, their hunting drive. What changed was only their tolerance for human proximity. The genetic evidence bears this out. When scientists analyzed DNA from modern domestic cats and compared it to wild relatives, they found that all domestic cats descend from Felis sylvestris libica from the Fertile Crescent region. The domestication happened once in one place, then spread globally as humans carried cats with them on their journeys. From the Near East to Egypt, where cats became sacred, to Rome, where cats traveled on ships to control shipboard rats, to Northern Europe with the Romans, to Asia along trade routes. Everywhere humans went, cats followed or were carried or traveled as working members of ship crews. By the time written history begins, around 5,000 years ago, cats are already firmly established as human associates. Egyptian art depicts them hunting beneath chairs at feasts, sitting on laps, wearing collars. But even these pampered Egyptian cats, some of them mummified and buried with honors, remained more independent than any other domestic animal. They could leave, they could survive on their own. They chose to stay. This choice, renewed by each generation of cats, by each individual cat that tolerates human presence instead of fleeing to the wild, is the foundation of the human-cat relationship. We didn't domesticate cats through force or selective breeding for thousands of years of that relationship. We simply made ourselves tolerable to them, useful to them, and they made the same calculation in reverse. The contract holds today. Cats control pests, provide companionship, fill an ecological niche in human environments. Humans provide food, shelter, medical care. Neither party is truly dependent. Feral cats prove that cats can survive without humans, and humans certainly don't need cats for survival anymore. But the relationship persists, not from necessity, but from choice, from the recognition that both species benefit, from the continuation of a partnership begun 10,000 years ago in the grain stores of the Fertile Crescent. The original security system still works. Let everything soften for a moment. Allow your thoughts to loosen their grip, your breathing to find its natural rhythm. There is nowhere you need to be, nothing you need to solve right now. As you continue to relax, we can gently drift together into the next story. Picture it, a Viking vessel cutting through gray-green water, its single square sail billowing in the wind. The hull is made of overlapping oak planks, fitted so precisely they barely leak, sealed with wool and tar. The crew numbers perhaps 30 men, rowing when the wind fails, resting when it holds. And moving among them, unnoticed by history but essential to the voyage, is a cat. This is not a story about Viking conquests or legendary raids. This is a story about partnership, about how cats became the Vikings' living weather instruments, their biological barometers, their early warning system for storms, about the 32 muscles in each feline ear, so finely tuned they could detect changes in atmospheric pressure long before any human sailor noticed the sky darkening, about trust between species, formed in the creaking belly of wooden ships, sealed by shared survival across hostile seas. So breathe slowly, let your eyes close, and imagine yourself on that deck, feeling the salt spray on your face, hearing the rhythmic creak of oars in their locks, and watching a gray cat pause mid-step, ears swiveling independently, sensing something in the air that the sailors cannot yet feel. The storm is coming, but the cat knows first. The Vikings understood something essential about long sea voyages. Food supplies could mean the difference between life and death. In the hold of every longship, wrapped in wool and sealed in barrels, they stored dried fish, grain, salted meat, provisions for weeks at sea, carefully rationed, irreplaceable. And wherever grain is stored, mice follow, rats too if the ship docked at larger ports. A single breeding pair of mice could devastate a ship's supplies in weeks. This the Vikings knew, and so they brought cats. Archaeological evidence confirms it. In Viking graves from the 8th to 11th centuries, researchers have found cat remains. Not just scattered bones, but cats buried with care, sometimes alongside their human companions, suggesting these weren't just working animals, but valued members of the crew. Genetic studies show that cats spread across the North Atlantic during the Viking Age, carried aboard long ships to Iceland, Greenland, perhaps even to North America. Wherever the Vikings sailed, cats followed. The practical reason was rodent control. Yes, but there was something more. In Norse mythology, cats held sacred status. Freya, goddess of love and fertility and war, traveled in a chariot pulled by 2 large cats, gifts from Thor himself. The cats were called Bigul and Tregul, and they were depicted as gray or blue, perhaps Norwegian forest cats, those sturdy felines built for northern climates with their thick, water-resistant coats and strong frames. To have a cat aboard ship was to carry a piece of Freya's blessing. The goddess who oversaw matters of the heart also oversaw safe passage, fertility of the land, the turning of seasons. Her cats represented protection, luck, divine favor. Sailors who treated cats well could expect Freya's blessing. Those who mistreated them risked her wrath. But beyond mythology and rodent control, the Vikings noticed something else about their ship's cats. The animals behaved strangely before storms. They would become restless, pacing the deck with their tails low. They would try to hide in the ship's deeper recesses, seeking shelter hours before rain began. Some cats would refuse to board at all if the weather was about to turn foul, and experienced sailors, those who had survived countless voyages, learned to watch their cats more carefully than they watched the sky. This wasn't superstition. This was survival. The North Atlantic is unforgiving. Storms rise quickly, turning calm seas into towering walls of water in hours. A long ship, open to the elements, low in the water, could be swamped and sunk if caught unprepared. Early warning meant everything. The difference between reaching shore and vanishing beneath the waves. And the cats, with their extraordinary senses, provided that warning. The relationship between Viking sailors and their cats was one of mutual dependence. The cats received food, shelter, safe passage to new lands. The Vikings received rodent control, divine blessing, and most importantly, weather prediction from a living creature more sensitive to atmospheric changes than any human could be. It was partnership forged in shared necessity, strengthened over generations, remembered in graves where cat and Viking rest together still. To understand how cats became the Vikings' weather radar, you must understand the architecture of a cat's ear. Each ear contains 32 individual muscles. By comparison, humans have only 6. Dogs have 18. But cats, with their 32 muscles per ear, can achieve something extraordinary. Each ear can rotate independently up to 180 degrees. They can point one ear forward to catch sounds ahead, while the other swivels backward to monitor what's behind them. They can tilt, flatten, raise, and angle their ears with precision that borders on mechanical. Except it's entirely biological, entirely natural. These muscles are divided into groups. The extrinsic muscles, the larger ones, move the entire ear, controlling its position and orientation. The intermediate muscles, just beneath the skin, fine-tune the placement, allowing for precise directional hearing. The intrinsic muscles within the ear canal itself adjust the opening size and shape, modifying sensitivity to different frequencies. This extraordinary control serves obvious purposes. Cats are hunters, evolved to detect the faintest rustling of prey in undergrowth, the high-pitched squeak of a mouse, the subtle scratching of claws on bark. Their hearing range extends from 48 hertz to 85 kilohertz. Far beyond human capability, they can hear lower frequencies than dogs and much higher frequencies than either dogs or humans. This makes them exceptional at pinpointing sounds in three-dimensional space, tracking movement by audio cues alone. But there's another function to those sensitive inner ears, one that has nothing to do with sound. The inner ear contains the vestibular system, responsible for balance and spatial orientation. And within that system are structures exquisitely sensitive to pressure changes. When atmospheric pressure drops, which happens hours before a storm arrives, these structures detect it. The cat feels it physically, a sensation in the inner ear, an awareness that something in the air has changed. Barometric pressure drops before storms because warm, moist air rises and cold, dense air moves in to replace it. This shift creates lower pressure at the surface. Meteorologists measure it with barometers. Moths and aphids sense it and alter their behavior. Birds detect it and seek shelter. And cats, with their highly developed inner ears, feel it as a distinct physical sensation. For a cat aboard a Viking longship, this meant awareness of approaching storms long before visible signs appeared. The sky might still be clear, the sea relatively calm, but the cat would know. Its ears would detect the pressure change. The sensation might be uncomfortable, even painful, like the way some people with joint conditions can feel rain coming through aches in their knees or hands. The cat might respond by rubbing its paws over its face and ears, trying to relieve the pressure. It might become agitated, seeking enclosed spaces away from the open deck. And the Vikings, watching their cat behave strangely when the weather seemed fine, learned to trust these signals. If the ship's cat became restless, they prepared for storms. They checked the rigging, secured loose cargo, considered whether to make for shore or ride it out at sea. The cat's behavior informed crucial decisions. Lives depended on it. This biological sensitivity wasn't magic, though it might have seemed so to people without modern understanding of atmospheric science. It was simply an evolution. Cats' wild ancestors needed to seek shelter before storms to survive. Those that could detect pressure changes early had better survival rates, passed their genes along, refined the trait over millions of years. And now, domesticated but still carrying those ancient instincts, cats aboard Viking ships in the 9th century continued doing what their ancestors had always done, reading the weather in ways humans couldn't, responding to signals invisible to human senses. Imagine yourself on that longship now. Feel the deck beneath you, oak planks worn smooth by countless feet, slightly curved where the keel rises toward bow and stern. The ship moves constantly, never still, rising and falling, with the swells in a rhythm that becomes second nature to the crew, but never quite stops being noticeable. The motion is different from walking on land. Everything shifts. Your balance adjusts continuously. The sound is constant. Wood creaking as the hull flexes with the waves. Sailors call it working. The way a wooden ship bends slightly, gives a little, adapts to the stress of moving through water. It's a good sound when it's gentle, rhythmic. Speaking of a vessel that knows how to yield without breaking, each plank is lashed to the ribs with spruce root, and these lashings allow movement, prevent the rigid brittleness that would crack under strain. The rigging adds its voice. Walrus hide ropes strain and ease as the sail fills and empties with wind. The mast, a single tall pine trunk fitted into a large block of wood that distributes its weight across the keel, groans when the wind strengthens. Everything on the ship makes sound, oars knocking in their locks when not in use, water sloshing in barrels, the occasional clatter of a cup or bowl sliding across the chest if someone forgot to stow it properly. And through all this, sound moves the cat. Gray fur, thick and slightly oily to repel water, Norwegian forest cat ancestors showing in the sturdy build and the tufted ears. The cat has learned the ship's rhythms, knows which planks are slippery when wet, where the safest perches are when the ship heels in the wind. It moves with extraordinary balance, compensating for the deck's motion with minute adjustments that use every one of those inner ear structures we discussed earlier. Salt spray occasionally washes over the low sides. The ship sits close to the water, designed for shallow draft, so it can navigate rivers and beach itself on shores. When a larger wave hits, or the ship cuts through a swell at the wrong angle, cold sea water sprays across the deck. The cat doesn't like this. It finds shelter, perhaps beneath a rowing bench, perhaps behind a pile of shields stowed along the gunwale. But it doesn't panic. It has made this journey before. It knows the pattern. Spray, then calm. Spray, then calm. The endless rhythm of sea travel. The sailors notice everything the cat does. One of them, an older man with gray in his beard, watches particularly carefully. He sailed for 30 years, survived storms that sank other ships, learning to read every sign the sea and sky provide. And he's learned to watch the ship's cat. When it eats well and sleeps peacefully, the weather will hold. When it becomes restless, pacing, refusing to settle, checking the same corners repeatedly, that means change is coming. Today, the cat is restless, Its ears swivel constantly, rotating to catch sounds the men cannot hear. It pauses mid-step to test the air with its nose, that sense 14 times more powerful than human olfaction, picking up something in the wind's composition. The humidity has risen slightly. The scent of ozone is building, still too faint for human detection, but clear to feline senses. And the pressure, the atmospheric pressure, has begun its slow decline, creating that sensation in the cat's inner ears that says, "Storm approaching." The old sailor notices. He watches the cat attempt to groom its ears more frequently than usual, rubbing its paws over the sides of its head repeatedly. This is a known sign, mentioned in weather lore going back centuries. When cats obsessively wash their ears, rain is coming. The pressure change affects the sensitive inner ear, and the grooming is an attempt to relieve the discomfort. He glances at the sky. Still clear. A few high clouds, nothing concerning. The wind is steady, favorable. Most of the crew notices nothing amiss, but he trusts the cat more than he trusts the clear sky. Storms in the North Atlantic arrive quickly. What looks safe at noon can become deadly by evening. He speaks to the helmsman, suggests they consider making for a sheltered cove he knows of, perhaps an hour's sailing east. The helmsman is younger, skeptical. The weather looks fine. Why waste time detouring? But the older sailor points to the cat, now trying to hide in the hold, pushing itself into the smallest space it can find between barrels. That's the sign, that's the warning they need to heed. And because Viking culture respected experience, respected those who had survived decades of seafaring, the helmsman agrees. They adjust course. An hour later, as they pull into the protected cove and begin securing the ship, the first drops of rain fall. Within 2 hours, the storm arrives in full force. Driving rain, wind that would have torn their sail apart, waves that would have swamped the open ship. But they're safe in the cove, sheltered by the rocky headland. Ship secured with extra lines. Cat dry in the hold, crew grateful. This happened countless times across centuries of Viking voyaging. Not always recorded, rarely mentioned in the sagas that preferred to tell of battles and discoveries, but essential nonetheless. The cats who sailed with Vikings were more than pest control, more than mascots, more than mythological symbols. They were practical necessities, biological instruments, calibrated by millions of years of evolution to detect weather changes through mechanisms humans still don't fully understand. Scientists today know that cats sense barometric pressure changes. They know about the inner ear structures, the sensitivity to pressure variations. But they still can't fully explain how cats sometimes react to storms up to 24 hours in advance, long before even sophisticated meteorological equipment shows significant changes. There's something in the synthesis of all their senses, something in how they integrate pressure data with smell and hearing, and some other awareness we haven't identified that allows for prediction that borders on precognition. The Vikings didn't need to understand the mechanism, they just needed to trust it. And they did, generation after generation, voyage after voyage, carrying cats across the North Atlantic, to Iceland, to Greenland, possibly to Vinland in North America. Everywhere the longships went, cats went too. And everywhere they landed, those cats' descendants remained, Norwegian forest cats spreading across northern latitudes, genetic studies confirming their Viking heritage. The partnership endured because it worked, because in the harsh mathematics of survival at sea, any edge matters. Any advance warning of dangerous weather matters. And a cat, with its 32 ear muscles, its pressure-sensitive inner ear structures, its heightened senses for smell and sound, provided that edge. Hold on to that feeling of calm, that quiet space you've begun to create inside your mind. With each slow breath, let the outside world feel a little more distant, a little less important. When you're ready, without any effort at all, another peaceful journey begins. Picture it, the years following the Second World War. Cities across Europe and America rebuilding, modernizing, threading cables through narrow conduits for telephone lines, for electrical systems, for all the invisible networks that would power the modern world. The pipes were already laid, buried beneath pavement and concrete, some of them barely wider than a man's fist, too narrow for a human to crawl through, too winding for simple tools to navigate, and yet cables needed to pass through them, connecting one building to another, one street to the next. This is a story about an elegant solution, about how engineers, faced with seemingly impassable tunnels, turn to creatures whose bodies operate by different rules than our own. Cats, with their free-floating collarbones and impossibly flexible spines, with their ability to squeeze through any opening their head can fit through. Cats who could walk into darkness carrying a thin line, emerge at the other end, and make possible connections that would light up the post-war world. So breathe deeply, let your eyes close, and imagine a tabby cat, calm and patient, standing at the entrance to a dark metal pipe, a lightweight cord attached to its collar, about to demonstrate the physics of a body that can flow wherever its head can fit. In the late 1940s, as cities recovered from war and rushed to modernize, infrastructure became paramount. The electrical grid needed expansion. Telephone lines were being installed across entire nations, connecting homes and businesses in networks that would transform daily life. But many of the conduits, the metal pipes and tunnels through which cables had to pass, were already in place, laid during earlier construction, built before anyone imagined the density of wiring the modern world would require. These conduits ran beneath city streets, through the walls of large buildings, under bridges, and along railway lines. Some were straight runs of a few dozen feet. Others twisted and turned, following the architecture they'd been fitted around, bending at angles that made them nearly impossible to navigate. And many were narrow, 8 inches in diameter, 6 inches, sometimes less, wide enough to accommodate a single cable or a small bundle, but far too small for a human to enter, too small even for a child. The problem was simple to state, but difficult to solve. How do you thread a cable from one end of a pipe to the other when you can't reach into the pipe yourself? Engineers tried various approaches. They attempted to blow lightweight lines through using compressed air, but the turbulence in the pipes made this unreliable. They tried rigid rods pushing from one end, but these couldn't navigate bends. They experimented with magnetic systems, but the metal pipes interfered with the fields. What they needed was something alive, something intelligent enough to understand the task, small enough to fit through the openings, flexible enough to navigate the turns, and willing to walk through darkness toward a distant goal. They needed though it took them time to realize it. Cats. The idea likely emerged from practical observation rather than theoretical planning. Someone noticed how cats could squeeze through impossibly small spaces. Someone else remembered seeing a cat navigate a drainage pipe or a tight crawl space. And someone, perhaps an engineer with a cat at home, thought, what if we attached a lightweight cord to the cat's collar and let it walk through the conduit? The cat would pull the cord behind it. Once through, the cord could be used to pull a heavier line, and that heavier line could pull the actual cable. Simple, elegant, dependent entirely on the cat's unique anatomy. The cats recruited for this work were typically strays or working cats already accustomed to humans. They needed to be calm, unafraid of enclosed spaces, comfortable with unusual environments. Cats who lived in factories or warehouses were ideal. They were used to noise, to strange tasks, to the presence of workers. Someone would place food or a familiar toy at the far end of the pipe. The cat, with a lightweight nylon cord attached to its collar, would be placed at the near end. And then, driven by curiosity or hunger or simple willingness to cooperate, the cat would walk into the darkness. This wasn't exploitation in the sense we might imagine. The pipes were clean, not dangerous. The distances were manageable. And cats, being cats, would simply refuse to participate if they didn't want to. Many did refuse, but some seemed to understand the game, seemed almost to enjoy it, the way cats enjoy threading through furniture or exploring tight spaces. For them, it was simply another narrow passage to navigate, another tunnel to master. To understand why cats could perform this task when no other animal could, you must understand the architecture of a feline skeleton. Specifically, you must understand the collarbone, that bone that in humans connects the shoulder blade to the breastbone, forming a rigid brace that limits how narrow a space we can squeeze through. Cats don't have this rigid connection. Their clavicle, the collarbone, is reduced to a tiny bone fragment, barely an inch long, that floats freely within the shoulder muscles, attached to nothing. It doesn't connect the shoulder blade to the sternum. It doesn't brace anything. It simply exists as a vestigial structure, a remnant of their evolutionary past, serving now only as an attachment point for certain muscles. This free-floating arrangement has profound consequences. Without a rigid collarbone anchoring the shoulder blades apart, a cat's entire shoulder assembly can collapse inward. The shoulder blades, themselves attached only by muscle rather than bone, can slide toward each other, narrowing the cat's profile dramatically. A cat that appears to be, say, 8 inches wide at the shoulders can compress itself down to 5 or 6 inches, sometimes even less, simply by drawing its shoulders together as it moves through a tight space. The spine contributes to this flexibility. Cats have more vertebrae than humans, typically 53 compared to our 33. Many of these extra vertebrae are in the tail, yes, but cats also have more thoracic and lumbar vertebrae, giving the spine greater articulation, more points where it can bend. And between each vertebra lies an intervertebral disc with extra elastic cushioning, allowing for extreme flexion and extension. A cat can arch its back into a curve that would break a human spine, can twist mid-leap to reorient its body, can curl up so tightly it becomes nearly spherical. The combination of free-floating collarbone and hyperflexible spine creates what scientists jokingly call liquid behavior. If a cat can fit its head through an opening, it can fit its body through. The head, being the widest rigid part of the skeleton, becomes the limiting factor. Everything else, shoulders, ribcage, hips, can compress, angle, or elongate to follow where the head leads. French physicist Marc-Antoine Fardin actually studied this phenomenon formally, publishing a paper titled On the Rheology of Cats that won him an Ig Nobel Prize. He demonstrated that cats, under certain conditions, behave according to the principles that govern liquid flow. They adapt their shape to fit containers. They can elongate when flowing through narrow passages. They exhibit what's called relaxation time, the time it takes for a material to return to its original shape after being deformed. For cats, this relaxation time varies depending on age, mood, and how comfortable they feel, but the principle holds: cats flow. This wasn't just amusing theoretical physics. This was practical engineering. When those 1940s engineers attached cords to cat collars and watched them enter narrow pipes, they were utilizing millions of years of feline evolution. The same adaptations that allowed wild cats to pursue prey into burrows, to escape predators through crevices in rocks, to navigate the complex three-dimensional environment of forests. These adaptations now serve to pull cables through human infrastructure. Imagine being that cat, standing at the entrance to the pipe. The opening is a perfect circle of darkness, perhaps 10 inches across, the metal edge cool under your paws. Behind you, the bustle of the construction site, voices of workers, the clang of tools, the rumble of vehicles. Ahead, only darkness and the faint echo of open space at the far end. You step forward. Your whiskers brush the sides of the pipe, measuring, confirming what your eyes and body already know. You'll fit. Your head enters first, and the world changes. The ambient light fades rapidly. Sound becomes strange, echoing off the metal walls in ways that compress and expand. Your paws make soft clicking sounds on the pipe's interior, the claws finding slight purchase on metal that might be slightly rusty, slightly textured, not quite smooth. The smell is particular: metal and dust, old grease from when the pipe was installed, maybe a faint dampness if the pipe runs near water lines. There might be cobwebs, though you feel them break across your face and whiskers with barely any resistance. The air is still, neither warm nor cold, just neutral, untouched by sun or wind. You move forward. Your shoulders compress slightly, automatically, drawing inward as the pipe narrows at a joint. The cord attached to your collar drags behind you, weightless at first, then accumulating slight friction as more of it enters the pipe. But it's light enough not to impede you. It whispers against the metal as it follows. The pipe bends. Your spine flexes, vertebrae articulating one by one as you follow the curve. What would require a human to awkwardly contort, for you is effortless. Your skeletal structure was designed for exactly this, moving through spaces that twist and turn. Your body flows around the bend like water following a channel. Darkness is absolute now, but you're not troubled. Your whiskers extend to their full width, creating a tactile map of the space around you. They tell you the pipe is consistent, not narrowing dangerously, not branching. Your eyes, those eyes evolved for hunting at dawn and dusk, make what use they can of what little light reflects down from the entrance behind you. Mostly, though, you navigate by touch, and by that sense cats have that awareness of space and body position that allows them to land on their feet, to judge leaps perfectly, to know instinctively how their body occupies three-dimensional space. The distance isn't far, maybe 20 feet, maybe 30. For a human, crawling through a pipe this narrow, if they could even fit, it would feel like an eternity, every inch a claustrophobic struggle. For you, it's a corridor, no different in principle from the gap behind a refrigerator or the space beneath a porch. You've navigated tighter squeezes pursuing mice. Ahead, light appears. Not much, but enough. The far end of the pipe. You can smell fresh air now and something else, food. Someone placed a dish there just beyond the opening. Tuna, perhaps, or mackerel. Your pace increases slightly, not urgently, but with renewed interest. You emerge into light. The workers are there, waiting. One of them reaches down, detaches the cord from your collar, offers you the promised food. Behind you, the cord lies in the pipe, stretching back to the other end. It's light enough not to have snagged on anything, strong enough to pull a heavier line through, and that heavier line will pull a rope. And the rope will pull the actual cable that needs installing. Your part is done. You eat, accepting the worker's praise with the indifference typical of your species, then wander off to find a sunny spot to rest. You've just made it possible to connect two buildings with telephone lines. You've solved an engineering problem that would have required days of work and specialized equipment. You've demonstrated the practical application of a free-floating collarbone. The partnership between humans and cats in this infrastructure work represented a meeting of technological need and biological capability. Engineers needed to move objects through spaces they couldn't reach. Cats needed to be cats, which meant navigating tight spaces was not a special skill, but simply what their bodies were built to do. The phrase liquid cat captures something real about feline biomechanics. When material scientists talk about liquids, they describe substances that lack a fixed shape, that conform to their containers, that flow when force is applied. Cats do all of this. Put a cat in a box, and it rearranges itself to fit the box's dimensions. Apply gentle pressure, and a cat will yield, redistributing its mass to accommodate. Release that pressure, and the cat returns to its preferred shape. Though this relaxation time can be considerable if the cat is comfortable and decides to stay compressed. The free-floating collarbone is central to this liquid-like behavior. In humans, the rigid collarbone creates a fixed width to our shoulders. We can't make ourselves narrower except by rotating our shoulders forward, which only helps marginally. But cats can collapse their shoulder width dramatically. The shoulder blades, attached only by muscle and fascia, can slide toward the spine, toward each other, reducing the lateral dimension of the torso. This allows the entire front half of the cat to become narrower. The rear half follows different principles. The hips are somewhat less flexible than the shoulders. They're held together by the pelvis, a solid ring of bone. But the pelvis itself is narrower than you might expect, and the hind legs can angle in ways that reduce the space the rear quarters occupy. Combined with the flexible spine that can angle the back end to follow the front end through even quite sharp turns, the result is a body that can thread through remarkably confined spaces. This capability served wild cats well. It allowed them to pursue prey into burrows and hollow trees. It let them escape larger predators by squeezing through gaps in rocks or under roots. It made them excellent survivors in complex environments where rigid anatomy would be a liability. And now, in the mid-20th century, it made them valuable partners in building the infrastructure of the modern world. The work wasn't widespread or long-lasting. As technology advanced, engineers developed better tools for running cables through conduits. Remotely controlled robots, specialized threading equipment, better pipe design that made installation easier from the start. The era of cats as infrastructure workers was brief, maybe a decade or two, and even then, limited to certain specific situations where the pipes were just the right size and configuration. But it happened. There are records, though scattered, of cats being used for this purpose. Oral histories from older telecommunications workers who remember their practice. Photographs, occasionally, of cats with cords attached emerging from pipes. Workers standing by with equipment. It was never formalized, never became official protocol, but it was known, used, effective. And it demonstrated something beautiful about collaboration between species. Humans recognized a problem their bodies couldn't solve. Cats possessed a solution in their very anatomy. Neither species could complete the task alone. Humans lacked the flexibility. Cats lacked the understanding of where cables needed to go and why. Together, with food or toys or simple cooperation as the bridge between them, they accomplished what needed doing. For just a few seconds more, remain here in this stillness. Notice how your body feels, how the tension slowly melts away. Nothing is demanding your attention. This time is entirely yours. And from this gentle pause, we can smoothly glide into what comes next. Picture it, the Western Front, 1917. Trenches stretching for hundreds of miles across Belgium and France, carved into the earth like scars. Men living underground, waiting, watching, surviving in conditions that broke both body and spirit. Rats everywhere, disease spreading through the damp, the constant threat of artillery, snipers, poison gas, and moving among the soldiers, winding between their boots, curling up on their laps during rare, quiet moments, were cats. These weren't pets in the usual sense, though the men loved them. They were working animals, recruited from London streets and French farms, brought to the trenches to hunt the rats that swarmed wherever armies gathered. But they did something else too, something that had nothing to do with hunting. Their extraordinary senses, honed by millions of years of evolution, detected changes in the air that humans couldn't perceive. Chemical shifts, pressure variations, the invisible approach of death on the wind. Tonight's story is about those cats, about the sensory power of their whiskers, about the biological precision that made them sentinels. Breathe slowly. Close your eyes and imagine a tabby cat pausing mid-step in a muddy trench, its whiskers twitching, sensing something wrong in the air long before the cry of gas, gas echoes down the line. An estimated 500,000 cats were deployed to the trenches during World War I. That number is almost impossible to verify with certainty, there being no official animal census, no bureaucratic record-keeping for the strays and farm cats that found their way to the front lines. But photographic evidence confirms their presence. Museum archives document their service, and the soldiers who lived with them remembered, writing in letters home about the cats that became their companions in that underground world. The official reason for their presence was rodent control. Trenches, with their stored rations and poor sanitation, with food supplies and tragic casualties, created ideal conditions for rats. The rats grew enormous, some as large as small cats themselves, bold and aggressive, eating the soldiers' food, spreading disease, making life in the trenches even more unbearable than it already was. The cats hunted them relentlessly, keeping their numbers down, protecting precious food stores, providing a service that no mechanical trap could match. But cats brought something else to trench life, something harder to quantify but equally vital: companionship, comfort, a reminder of home and normalcy in a place that was neither. Soldiers shared their rations with the cats. They made them little beds from spare clothing. They gave them names, told stories about them in letters, photographed them sitting on their laps or perched on their shoulders. The cats, for their part, seemed to understand what was needed. They stayed close, offered their warmth on cold nights, their soft fur and gentle purring providing solace that nothing else could. And then there was their sensitivity. Cats possess sensory capabilities that far exceed human perception. Their hearing extends into frequencies we cannot detect. Their sense of smell is 14 times more powerful than ours. And their whiskers, those specialized hairs called vibrissae, can detect the slightest changes in air pressure, air currents, even chemical composition. These abilities, evolved for hunting and survival in the wild, became inadvertently useful in detecting environmental threats that soldiers couldn't sense until it was almost too late. When poison gas attacks began in earnest, chlorine first, then phosgene, then the terrible mustard gas that burned lungs and blistered skin, the danger was often invisible. Some gases were nearly odorless. All were colorless or nearly so, especially at night or in fog. By the time soldiers smelled the distinctive odor or saw the creeping mist, precious seconds had already been lost. But cats, with their heightened senses, often reacted earlier. They became agitated. They tried to hide. They showed distress before the humans around them detected anything wrong. The British military, recognizing this sensitivity, reportedly drafted 500 cats specifically for gas detection duty, using them as living sensors the way miners used canaries. If the cat showed signs of distress, soldiers knew to reach for their gas masks, to seek shelter, to prepare for the invisible assault. It was a grim bargain. The cats, being smaller and more sensitive, would succumb to the gas more quickly than humans. Their sacrifice bought time, provided warning, saved countless lives. Not all cats in the trenches served this specific role. Many were simply there, adopted by units as mascots and companions, hunting rats and providing comfort. But all of them, by virtue of their biology, possessed the capability to detect chemical threats before their human companions could. The question was whether anyone noticed, whether anyone understood what the cat's behavior was telling them. To understand how cats could detect gas attacks before humans, you must understand their whiskers. Not the normal fur that covers their body, but the vibrissae, thick, stiff, specialized hairs that are as much sensory organ as they are hair. A cat typically has 24 primary whiskers on its face, arranged in 4 rows on each side of the muzzle, 12 per side, perfectly symmetrical, strategically positioned. These whiskers are not like normal hairs. They embed into the skin 3 times deeper than ordinary fur, rooted in special follicles that are densely packed with nerve endings and blood vessels. Each whisker follicle contains between 100 and 200 nerve cells, creating what scientists call a follicle sinus complex. When the whisker moves, even microscopically, these nerves fire, sending detailed sensory information to the brain about what caused the movement, where it came from, and what it might mean. The whiskers function as incredibly sensitive detectors of air currents and pressure changes. They can sense movements as small as 2/1000ths the width of a human hair. When air flows past a whisker or a whisker brushes against an object, it vibrates, which is why the scientific name vibrissae comes from the Latin word vibrio, meaning to vibrate. These vibrations transmit through the follicle to the nerve endings, which relay specific information about the stimulus's location, intensity, and direction to the brain. This system allows cats to detect air currents bouncing off objects, giving them a form of tactile echolocation. They can navigate in total darkness by sensing how air moves around obstacles. They can feel the approach of another animal before seeing or hearing it, simply by detecting the disturbance that animal creates in the surrounding air. And crucially for our story, they can detect changes in air composition and pressure that signal approaching weather changes or environmental threats. When poison gas was released in World War I, it didn't just appear instantly everywhere. It moved, carried by wind, flowing along the ground or drifting through the air depending on its density. As it moved, it displaced air, created currents, altered pressure slightly. These changes were subtle, far too subtle for human senses to detect at a distance, but a cat's whiskers could feel them. The whiskers detected the approaching gas cloud through the disturbance it created in the air. The leading edge of the gas, flowing toward the trenches, pushed air ahead of it, creating pressure waves that radiated outward. The cat's whiskers, exquisitely sensitive to pressure variations, picked up these waves long before the gas itself arrived. The cat might not understand what it was sensing, but it understood that something was wrong. Something dangerous was approaching. Additionally, cats have an organ called the vomeronasal organ, or Jacobson's organ, located in the roof of their mouth. This organ detects chemical compounds in the air, particularly pheromones, but also other substances. When exposed to certain chemicals, including some of those used in poison gas, the cat would experience physical discomfort, a sensation that something toxic was present in the air. This would compound the information from their whiskers, creating an overwhelming sensory message: danger. The cat's response to these sensations was instinctive agitation, attempting to flee or hide, excessive grooming, especially around the face and whiskers, as if trying to remove contamination, restlessness, pacing, vocalizing. Any soldier paying attention to their trench cat would notice these behavioral changes, would see that something was disturbing the animal even when the air seemed perfectly normal to human senses. Imagine yourself there, in the trench. It's late evening, the light fading to gray. The temperature has dropped and dampness rises from the mud that lines the trench bottom ankle deep in places, sucking at boots with every step. The smell is particular: earth and sandbags, unwashed bodies, tobacco smoke, latrines, and underneath it all the sweet, sick odor of decay that you've learned to ignore because there's no escaping it. The sounds are constant but familiar. Distant artillery rumbling like thunder, occasional rifle shots, the creak of duck boards beneath weight, quiet conversations between the soldiers, someone coughing in the cold air. You've been here long enough that these sounds no longer startle you. They're simply the background of existence, the soundtrack to waiting. The cat is with you, a gray tabby that showed up 3 months ago and stayed, drawn by the food soldiers shared and the relative safety of human presence. She's become the company mascot, passed from lap to lap during rest periods, hunting rats at night, sleeping in someone's pack during the day. Right now she's sitting on the fire step, grooming herself, methodical as always, running her paw over her whiskers, behind her ears, down her flank. Then she stops, mid-lick, paw raised, completely still. Her ears rotate independently, swiveling to catch sounds you can't hear. Her whiskers, which had been relaxed and hanging naturally on either side of her muzzle, suddenly fan forward, pointing toward no man's land. She holds this position for several seconds, tense, focused. Then she drops from the fire step and tries to push herself into the smallest space available, squeezing behind a pile of sandbags, making herself as compact as possible. This is not normal behavior. This is fear. You watch her, puzzled. The evening seems no different than any other. The air smells the same. The sounds haven't changed. But the cat knows something you don't. Her whiskers have detected a change in air pressure, a shift in the currents flowing through no man's land toward your position. Something is coming. Another soldier notices the cat's behavior too. He's older, been through gas attacks before, survived by luck and quick reflexes. He knows to watch the animals. "Gas," he says quietly, reaching for his mask. The word spreads instantly down the line. Gas, gas, gas. And then seconds later, you see it. A low-lying mist creeping across no man's land, hugging the ground, flowing like water into the shell holes and over the broken earth. Mustard gas, the horror of the Western Front, the chemical that burns everything it touches, leaves men blind and choking, causes wounds that never properly heal. But you have your mask on now. The whole section does, warned by the cat's behavior, given those crucial extra seconds to prepare. The gas flows into the trench, seeps around corners, settles into low spaces. But you're protected. Your eyes are covered, your lungs filtered, your skin as covered as possible. And you wait, breathing carefully through the mask's filter until the gas dissipates and the all clear can be given. The cat, smaller and more vulnerable, has breathed in some of the gas despite trying to hide. She emerges from her shelter, moving slowly, eyes irritated, breathing labored. Someone wraps her in a cloth, tries to wipe away the chemical residue, offers her water. She'll survive, though she'll be sick for days. But the men she warned will survive too, because her biology detected what theirs could not. There is something profound in this partnership between species, this unintentional collaboration forged in the crucible of war. The cats didn't choose to serve. They were simply there, doing what cats do, existing according to their nature, But that nature, shaped by evolution across millions of years, equipped them with sensory capabilities that happened to be useful in detecting human-made chemical weapons. The whiskers that evolved to help cats hunt in darkness, to navigate through tall grass to detect the movements of prey, these same structures could detect the approach of poison gas. The vomeronasal organ that evolved to process pheromones and identify other animals became capable of registering toxic chemicals. The heightened sensitivity that made cats excellent predators made them excellent sentinels, whether they understood that role or not. The soldiers learned to trust these biological sensors. Not with complete reliability, cats are still cats, and might show distress for any number of reasons having nothing to do with gas attacks. But often enough that watching the trench cats became part of staying alive. When the cat acted strangely, you paid attention. When it tried to hide, you checked your mask. When it seemed agitated for no apparent reason, you prepared for the worst. This trust was built on observation, on pattern recognition, on the accumulated experience of soldiers who lived close to these animals day after day and learned their behaviors. It wasn't scientific. It wasn't formalized into official protocol, at least not widely, but it was real, and it saved lives. And the men who benefited from it remembered. The cats paid a price for their service. Many died, victims of the same gas they helped detect. Others survived the war only to be left behind when armistice came and the trenches were abandoned. Some soldiers brought their trench cats home, smuggling them onto ships, hiding them in packs, determined that the animal who had kept them company through hell deserved a peaceful retirement. But many more were simply released, left to fend for themselves in the devastated landscape of post-war Europe. There are graves in France and Belgium where cats rest alongside their human companions, buried together by soldiers who wanted to honor the animals that had served with them. These graves don't have official markers, aren't included in war memorials, won't appear in history books. But they exist, silent testimony to bonds formed in extremity, to the recognition that even small lives matter. That service takes many forms. The biological precision that made cats effective gas detectors continues today. Their whiskers still detect pressure changes and air currents with extraordinary sensitivity. Their vomeronasal organs still process chemical information. The same adaptations that served them in the trenches of World War I serve their descendants now, hunting in barns and exploring homes, navigating their environment with a sophistication we're only beginning to fully understand. As you drift toward sleep tonight, perhaps you can carry this image with you. A cat in a muddy trench, whiskers fanned forward, detecting something invisible in the air, providing warning through pure biology, through the accident of having senses more acute than those of the humans around it. The quiet heartbeat, the vigilant eyes, the whiskers vibrating with information we cannot perceive, a small sentinel standing watch over larger creatures, keeping them safe through no choice of its own, simply by being what evolution made it. If you enjoyed this journey through history and biology, please consider liking this video and subscribing to Pillow Trace for more interesting stories to listen to before bedtime. Sleep well, knowing that sometimes the smallest among us carry the greatest gifts, and that nature's precision serves purposes we never intended but desperately needed.